What if I told you that some of the tastiest foods in the world, like kimchi, sauerkraut, and kefir, are made with the help of tiny invisible microbes working behind the scenes? Fermentation isn't just about food preservation, it's a culinary masterpiece that transforms humble ingredients into flavor packed, nutrient rich powerhouses. But despite its transformative power, many of us do not know what it is. Welcome back to another episode of the Gayu Lewis podcast, where we explore stories and practices that transform and inspire. I'm your host, Gayu Lewis, your wellness advocate, and always curious about fascinating ways food and nature intersect to improve our lives. Today, I am joined by Maher Tabchy, founder of Tabchili, UAE's first pioneering producer of fermented foods based right here in Dubai. Maher's love for fermentation began over a decade ago, transforming fermented pepper creations for his family and friends. Now, his journey has transformed into a mission to revive the lost art of slow and sustainable food, turning unknown ingredients or humble food into probiotic-rich, nutritional powerhouses. Today, we'll dive into the world of fermentation, explore the process, the magic of the microbes, and how foods like kombucha, kefir, and sauerkraut can bring sustainability and flavor to your table. If you've ever been curious about what goes behind those bubbling glass jars or how fermented foods can improve your health and meals, this conversation is for you. Let's get bubbling. Hi, Maher. Thank you
Hey, Ga-
so much for coming onto this show.
And thank you very much, Gayu. I remember we met, we talked about this. Great to share the message about fermentation, gut health, and wellness.
Amazing. Now, I want to, just get right into the whole conversation with the basics. What exactly is fermentation and how does it work? What happens at the microbial level,
Okay.
of kefir, kimchi? So I know they all are different, but I'm assuming there is the basis fermentation, right?
Yeah. I'll try not to bore the audience. Basically, fermentation is actually food preservation. And after drying, fermentation is the second most important way of preserving foods. But what is fermentation? Fermentation is actually controlled rot. You're allowing food texture to change over time, but controlling the process. So if you think of agriculture, we used to produce so much food, but it was going to waste. Once understood how to preserve it, i.e., fermented, it was lasting for longer seasons, but with different textures. That is actually fermentation. On the microbial level, it's bacterias such as, I'm not going to say technical, but bacterias and yeast coming in together to convert sugars into acids, alcohol, or different kind of flavors. And they act also as enhancers of shelf life.
Amazing. What got you into fermentation? I assume your background was not, anything to do
Yeah,
with the culinary world, like you mentioned.
exactly.
What fascinated you to start studying fermentation?
So first of all, when it comes to fermentation, these are flavors that you cannot make with fire, right? You use fire to cook, but when you use fermentation, you're allowing bacteria to do the cooking for you. And what's beautiful about that is that you create your own flavors with time. So I became fascinated on how time can change the flavor of cheese, of kimchi, of kefir, and how you can control that process to create those flavors. But most important was about gut health. I was working for a pharmaceutical company, and basically I joined that company because they required some of the drugs that my family members needed. Was purposely driven. But the more I read about chronic diseases and inflammations and so on, I know that it's linked to gut health and wellness. And I realized that fermented food plays such a big part, which I know about it. It wasn't available in UAE. So I made it a mission to start this business to bring education and awareness for fermented foods for people who ever need it can have it on their table because it should be democratized. It's lost because, as you know, Gayu, our parents, our grandmothers used to ferment or preserve food for seasons. We didn't have strawberries every day. We didn't have these every day. It was seasonal. It was fermented. It was more nutritious, better for us. Today, everything is processed. That's what I wanted to bring back. Comfort foods that brings flavors you cannot make with fire.
I like how you said flavors that you can't make with fire.
Yeah.
Very well put. What was the first thing you tried? Was it a success or was it an absolute failure?
Everything with what's nice about fermentation is that unfortunately there is no culinary schools that teach you. It all comes from trial and error. As you know, like it's not new. It's thousands of years. So think of dosa, think of idli, think of dai, think of cheese, miso, soy sauce. All of those are fermented. It's food preserves over time. But there was never any specific technique. It's all trial and error. The first time you do it, you're exploring with something new completely. Flavor might be off, but then you fine tune and tweak. So I've had lots of errors, jars becoming moldy or bubbly. But when it comes to fermentation, Actually, people don't know, but it's one of the safest way to preserve food because it can be the healthiest. And because it's so acidic, the bad bugs can survive there. So it can be the thing that our old generations were making on a daily basis, and it was always safe for them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, but you still didn't answer what was the first thing you made?
The first thing I made was actually fermented chili.
Okay.
I'm a hot chili fan, and I like to used to grow my chilies and ferment them. But like the more I read about fermented chilies, I wanted to pack them in a jar and ferment them. But unfortunately, it was always getting white layer of mold, which I didn't know it was not mold, but was always going off. I never got the texture. So this was my first crack on fermentation. It took me lots of years to actually develop my recipe, which now I have across.
Yeah, we love the chili sauce. I think
Thank you.
anybody who tries it becomes a fan of it. I told you my 10-year-old loves the chili sauce.
All right, thanks. That's a good one.
So you're saying that fermentation is an easy process, but once you understand what goes behind it, how do you start the process? What is needed?
If you want to think of fermentation, like when I told my mom I'm opening this concept, she's like, why you want to teach people how to put salt on stuff? It's not about only putting salt or preserving the food, understanding what goes to the acidic flavor perspective. Yogurt is fermented, right? Cheese is fermented, and cucumbers are fermented, and they all have a sour flavor.
Yeah.
That sour flavor is because of one bacteria called lactobacillus. She likes salt. If you give her the right amount of salt, right temperature, and right preservation techniques, you can get those flavors. So you have to make sure that you have 2-3 parameters to control, which are very easy, and then you can create those flavors. So right salt, right temperature, and the right vessel to ferment in it.
Can you ferment any vegetable, or there needs to be certain qualities in a vegetable?
What's nice about fermentation is food preservation is like, I call it from waste to taste, because you can take any kind of food waste or kind of vegetables, you can ferment anything. Okay, so if you think of what is fermented, beef is fermented, fish sauce is like a lot of fish fermented, milk can be fermented, different kind of cheeses, all kind of vegetables can be fermented. They don't care if it's a pretty vegetable or ugly vegetable because it changes texture over time. What's nice about fermentation, you can take all the food waste and repurpose it for a beautiful taste.
Okay, that's very well put. That's why you're talking about the whole sustainability.
Exactly.
So you're not throwing things off.
Yes. So one of the things that I do with chefs as well, I call it thrash to cash, because we produce so much food waste, it goes this one. But fermentation can also be food security. In our household, it's not called food security, but it's more about preserving food scraps, making them to pickles or fermented pickles. You can take any kind of, like, I call it the garbage kimchi, but it's actually like food scraps from your cabbage, from your bell peppers. Just put them together, you can make a nice kimchi flavor. Anything can be made with fermentation. That's why many chefs use a zero waste approach by using food scraps. So there's so many different, it's a whole spectrum. Every single part of fermentation can take you through a rabbit hole because you can make so many flavors.
Amazing. So, but you were talking about there's no culinary school that teaches you. So, is it only if tomorrow, if I wanted to try or our listeners wanted to try, is there somewhere they can learn by watching? Is there somebody that you follow or people can follow you?
Of course, there are many thought leaders who are into fermentation, who are reviving this movement. They're across the world, from Africa to Europe to the States, many big names. And everybody has their own techniques because eventually fermentation is very cultural. Like cheese making is also an art. Wine making is an art. Kefir making is an art. Bread making is an art. Everything is an art by itself. We call it art. Why? Because it's not exact recipes. It's art because so many different parameters change flavors. So we can learn all of those different techniques, but not condensed in one because you're changing textures of different kind of foods. So for example, if you want to go into soy making or to make miso, it's an art by itself. If you want to go to, as you know, vinegar making is also an art by itself. So what's beautiful about it is the spectrum is so large. But if you want to learn the basics, it can be done at home, okay? Or it can be joining workshops where you get the confidence of how to make it.
And you run workshops as well.
Yeah, so the purpose why I opened Tabchili is not only to sell the products that we make, but also drive the awareness aspect onto it. One of the barriers of fermentation is thinking, oh, it's live bacteria. Can I consume it? Is it safe? And what we do at Tabchili, what I do is to drive awareness of how you can ferment very safely and confidently to make sure that you give the best foods and with the best flavors for everybody around you. Because if you don't get it right the first time, you get, like upset. So for us, for me, I give you the journey of how to ferment from drinks, kombucha, kefir, vinegars, to milk, cheeses, everything as an amateur starter level and even advanced techniques.
You mentioned kombucha. It's become a trendy buzzword nowadays. What is kombucha?
Kombucha is a fermented drink. Very simply, it's tea and sugar, and you put a starter to it, okay? It's called the SCOBY. So what does the SCOBY mean? It's actually meaning symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. It's actually bacteria coming in harmony. But I'm going to step back and explain just two in fermentation. So in fermentation, you have two kinds of fermentation. One we called wild fermentation or spontaneous fermentation. Take sauerkraut, for example, or cabbage. You take cabbage, you put salt, it becomes sauerkraut, so it becomes flavorful. But as you know, for sourdough, you need yeast, you need a starter. We call this cultured fermentation. Kombucha, you need a starter. So when you take that starter, you put it in tea and sugar, around 7 to 10 days, you get kombucha. And kombucha goes to a very nice tangy flavor because it goes through alcoholic and acidic fermentation. But we say it's healthy because it contains probiotics. And the biggest thing why I opened this concept is to bring forward what are probiotics. And probiotics, as you know, are the small bacteria which control our gut and are responsible for the overall wellness. And they're also available in kombucha.
You mean to say that if tomorrow I buy the SCOBY from you and then I just put tea and sugar and I put the SCOBY in,
Yeah.
how long does it take to make the kombucha? And it can still get spoiled?
So, kombucha is one of the safest, not safest, easiest and safest fermented drink to make. It doesn't spoil that easily because it's very acidic, very vinegary. We call it kombucha tea vinegar. But basically, yeah, so I give you the starter to start your journey. The recipe card was points 1 to 10 with all the mistakes you cannot make. And eventually, in 10 days, you get the flavor profile. But what's nice about, as I mentioned, fermentation is time. Day 6 to 7 will be sweet. Day 7 will be 10 sweet to tangy. If you go to day 14, become very acidic. And everybody has different taste profiles. So my kombucha might not be the one that you would like. That's what's interesting about it. The best kombucha is not the one you buy, it's the one you make at home.
I like that. Very nice. Because I'm assuming I can add the flavors, what I like to today's drink and not have to buy the store bought where I don't know what exactly goes in it.
So many of store boughts are good, nutritious, but if you want the raw one, which contains the most probiotics and plus the flavor that you like, is the one you make at home. It's always the case because commercial kombucha is trying to tailoring a wide spectrum. But as an individual, we all have different taste profiles, and it can be so cheap to make. Instead of spending X amount of money for one time, we can make endless cycles of kombucha and even open your brewery from one SCOBY.
So you said that the acidic level increases based on the duration.
Correct.
Now, if after 14 days, 15 days, I don't strain my kombucha, will it continue to keep fermenting and become vinegar? Or at certain point, does it stop?
So to explain the process, as I mentioned in the beginning, bacteria consume the sugar and convert to alcohol, then to vinegar. Once the sugar lapses, because the amount of sugar is finite, it's not infinite. So once the sugar is being converted to the vinegar afterward, to the acidity tanginess, eventually the sugar will dwindle and that flavor of vinegar will stay throughout. So usually around 14 days at room temperature, you will get that vinegar flavor throughout. And actually kombucha, what people don't know, I call it a cheat vinegar because in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you can get the vinegar which you can use on your salad dressings and everything else.
Okay, if you don't drink it.
Yeah, you can drink it as well. Some people drink kombucha in the morning instead of, like some people drink in the morning water and vinegar to boost their metabolism. They can do that as well with kombucha because it has also a bit of probiotics. So the culinary world is huge and kombucha is by itself an art because you can make so many different fermented drinks and a good soda substitute.
Now, coming back to the other K, which is kefir.
Kefir.
What is kefir?
All right. Technical today, but I love your answers. Thanks, Gayu. So kefir, you have milk kefir and you have water kefir. So these are also cultured fermentation where you need a starter to trigger the process. And we also call them scobies, symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, where I mean is like bacteria is coming together and then they form harmony, which then you use to trigger the process. So milk kefir is actually using those starter cultures. And I think milk kefir originated, if I'm not mistaken, from the Caucasus, from that region. Back then, they used to use goat hides and put milk in them and use strains of kefir and just, before they go to the tent, slap the goat hide, shake the grains, and then strain it. It takes 48 hours to get the flavor. What you do, for 1 liter of milk, you take those starter cultures, about 10 grams, 5 to 10% ratio, you put them in milk, and then they start consuming the lactose, and in 24 hours, you start getting a sour flavor, which you see in any milk kefir bot. If you leave it for an additional 24 hours, it curdles, and then you can make your own cheese from it. And then how do you do the process? You strain the grains and you reuse again. So instead of buying kefir every day, buying one time the grain can give you a lifetime of milk kefir and cheeses that you can enjoy without having to spend every day.
I was just going to ask you. So basically, there's no shelf life. Like there's no lifetime. It'll keep producing and producing and
producing, and they grow. So eventually, after 1 month, you'll have more kefir grains you can pass on to your friends. That's what's nice about fermentation is that those starters, you can share them with your friends and everything else. And when I started, I had 0 starters. One, then as you know, like I also sell the starters and share them. Most of the kombuchas available in many restaurants are bought because they got from my SCOBY first. Nobody can buy a SCOBY in Dubai. You have to share it from somebody. But then I wanted to bring that forward. And that's what's nice about the starter. They replicate, they spread, and more households will have them.
So it's about spreading health awareness,
Yeah.
love for
For
health.
bacterias and for different flavors, but definitely it's very for me, Gayu, like having my culture spread, which means bringing flavors new to household and over health and wellness, is just one of my mission.
It's an amazing mission. Hope, everybody, tries to understand that mission and, work towards it. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing thing. Just talking about, fermentation, what is the most unusual or, exciting fermented product that you ever made or tried? Maybe you traveled somewhere and you tried something and you're like, wow.
Okay, so the most unusual one is garum or beef garum. So garum is basically the Romans used to put fish in big pots and let them rest at room temperature where you get fish sauce. What's fish sauce? Fish sauce is basically fish with their gut fermenting over a long time, room temperature, and you get this umami flavor.
Yeah.
But I tried the same thing with beef. So you take beef and you inoculate it with koji, which is a mold called Aspergillus oryza, which they use, and then it transforms the flavor. And over a period of 3 months to 6 months, you dehydrate it and you take the liquid, and that liquid is like an umami bomb. It means a flavor. You just, as fish sauce gives flavor, one drop, the same thing. And for me, the whole process of that weight, of time, of that beef being changed texture, and eventually to get that amount of liquid to use for flavor was one of the most fascinating world of flavor for me, and also it can come with some health benefits, a bit of salt as well. Just one of the fascinating world for me to come into. But as you know, the whole world is big. I worked in chocolates for 4 years. It's also fermented. I also worked for liquor for 12 years. Industry is also fermented. So, but this was one of the.
So you've been somewhere around surrounded around fermentation.
Yeah, we are all into it. But I was in industries where they spent years to create flavors, and like sometimes you think of, why does wine take 3 years or 4 years? What does cheese take 2-3 years? They make the cheese and they wait 3 years before they sell it for you. That's a long wait of craftsmanship for them to wait 3 years to get that flavor. Imagine how much time they have spent R&D it before.
Yeah.
And it's art. That's what really appreciated from the flavor perspective. That's why you pay so much for some of those items, because it's time.
Yeah. It's, I think, the craftsmanship plus the effort that's gone into, making it, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So that's the part of time and flavor which I really like about. And that's also what's nice about it, it's complemented as well with, so some of them are very salty. Not all of them are as healthy for us, but some of the basic ones that you can make even at home are packed with probiotics.
Since you mentioned making at home, somebody who's completely after listening to this podcast, somebody gets very excited saying, oh, I'm going to start this fermentation process. What's a good starting point? What is a product that is very easy to make or, to make at home for somebody?
I'm going to give you 2 products which I think, are very easy to make. So first of all, when it comes to an easy one, sauerkraut is a very easy one to make because it's a cabbage head, and you add 2 to 3% of salt ratio based on the weight of the cabbage. So basically, you take a cabbage, you shred it, you rinse it, you shred it, you put it in a bowl, you sprinkle it with salt for every kg about 30 grams. You massage it, you put it in a jar, and then you close it for 7 days or 14 days. You start getting day 0 salty cabbage, but day 14 you got sour cabbage. That's an easy one to make. And the second one, we all like pickles. But as you know, in pickling, we use vinegar. And vinegar is sterile. Vinegar kills the probiotics. So fermenting pickles is completely different. You don't use vinegar, you use only salt. So take cucumbers, small, ripe, crunchy, like snack cucumbers. Put like for every liter of water, 3 to 4% of salt, and then you wait 4 to 5 days. You start getting a bit of crunchy and a bit sour. So it's easy.
You mentioned right temperature. What's the right temperature?
So temperature plays a big role, not in the flavor, but in the time it takes. For example, as I was mentioning sauerkraut, if you're making sauerkraut, which is a staple in Germany and many parts in Europe, as you know, winter can be kind of harsh, and the kitchen counter will be cold. So instead of taking 6 weeks, it takes 3 weeks. It takes maybe 6 weeks to get the right flavor. But if you do it in summer, maybe 20 to 25 degrees, it takes shorter time. So temperature dictates time because the bacteria activity will change. To explain it in a very nutshell, once you put something in a freezer, they last for a long time because the bacteria are sleeping, no baby making. A fridge, a bit longer, and anything at room temperature moves a lot of activity.
Yeah.
So room temperature, 20 to 25, is where the activity of the bacteria thrive. which is a good way to start with fermenting vegetables. If you go colder, just take a longer time to get the flavor you want. That's it.
But a lot of times when you try doing this at home, you have this layer of white mold that forms. Why does that form? What have you done wrong?
So first of all, just to explain the process of safety when it comes to fermented foods. So fermented foods are considered safe. I'm going to talk specifically about fermented vegetables because there's one specific bacteria which dominates called lactic acid bacteria or lactobacillus. She's responsible for the sourness, but she drops the content of the liquid and everything below 4 as a pH, so acidic, which means that when the pH or the acidity level is below 4, all the bad bugs cannot survive there. That's why it lasts for a long time. So everything below the brine, everything below the water, it's fine because it's so acidic. Once you have vegetables popping outside the water layer, they're exposed to something not acidic, and then mold can come in. So usually mold is very visible. It has a flurry or powdery texture, but always make sure two things. One, you have the right amount of salt to start with because salt inhibits the bad growth of bad bugs and starts it, but keep everything submerged under the water. That's the only thing. Sometimes you might get a white layer of film, but it's not mold, it's called cami yeast.
Okay.
Just have to skim it off.
Okay.
But mold is usually blue, green, and
Okay.
once you see that, discard it. It means two things. It's not submerged under the water and not enough salt to start.
So if the white layer forms, you just skim it and then you can continue with the process.
So what is that? I hope I'm not very boring your audience, Gayu, but thank you because I like talking about this stuff all day. So basically, this is called kami yeast. This is part of surface growth because the fermentation, you're putting them in a jar.
Yeah.
And in a jar, everything is bubbly and active. Sometimes you have to release the gas, and air comes in and creates sometimes surface growth. It's completely normal. Think of like a canned cucumber or pickles. We all see that sometimes white film on top. Just skim it off. It's completely harmless.
So this 14 days of fermentation that you speak about, so you don't open the jar at all. Once you mix the salt and you press the cabbage down or any pickled vegetable for that matter, you don't open it?
What happens if you ever fermented before or you have seen any fermented videos, you realize there's some bubbling happening because fermentation in a very technical world, it means bacteria surviving in an anaerobic environment where there's no air. But they consume sugar, and as a byproduct, they create CO2. So if you don't release the CO2, your jar it's closed, but it might overflow. So you have to, the first 5 days, always release the gas because once you open the jar, you can see bubbles coming up. That's activity from the bacteria. So basically changing texture, but they need a bit of the CO2 to be released. Not all jars are closed, but in vegetable fermentation, it's a case you have to release.
If at all, there is a little mold that gets created. A lot of people don't want to throw a whole jar and they consume. Is it bad or is it okay?
So mold is bad because if you see mold, it means it's already been there and forming. So all the spores are already in the jar. So I know like sometimes we see a bit of mold on the bread, we scrape it off and we eat it. It's part of us not discarding stuff. But I don't recommend consuming it. Just throw it and start again and just see okay, what happened. Something happened to trigger that. And that would be a good way for you to step back because you say, oh, it took me 14 days to make it. Now I have to throw it. But next time, you'll make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. So you'll keep an eye on maybe what went wrong.
Yeah, just like you just have to troubleshoot again what happened. But definitely, I don't recommend consuming it just because it's already contaminated.
What is the worst that can happen? Can someone die? Or
I mean, you're eating cheese that has mold on it, like in Roquefort, So sometimes mold is appreciated in the culinary food, but eventually, when you're fermenting vegetables, it means that if mold is present, it means it's harmful toxins that gonna be in your body. But I don't hope anybody would die, but it's advisable not to consume it.
another thing that generally people don't realize is that when you buy these probiotic foods or things specifically like kimchi or sauerkraut from the market, most of them are pasteurized, which means that the live bacteria is not there anymore. Correct? Would you recommend that people read labels and understand that if they eat that pasteurized one, are they still getting the benefit or no?
No. So that's one of the reasons why I opened Tabchili. I'm gonna try to market my products.
Yeah.
But just gonna explain the difference. So our products are sold in the fridge, and it's written on them raw, live, unpasteurized. Our competition is sold on shelf. What's the difference? They are pasteurized. It meaning that they killed all the probiotics or the bacteria to make it shelf stable. That's pasteurization. We have them in the fridge, so it means the bacteria are there, but it's so cold in the fridge that they're no longer fermenting. So I fermented for 7-10 days, put them in the fridge to stop the fermentation process, but to maintain the probiotics, which is the good bacteria. That's the main difference. They are both tasty, but one of them is better for your gut.
If you're eating it just for the pickling, eat anything that you want.
Correct.
But if it is, you really want to take care of your gut, then make sure that it's not pasteurized.
And eventually, if you read ingredients, I don't have any glutamate or any kind of like funky ingredients that we don't know what they are, because most of pasteurized products have shelf enhancers, flavor artificial preservatives, which are not found. Fermentation by itself is a natural preservative. I don't need to put anything else except tell my guys inside, preserve it for the customer. That's it.
Yeah. And the ingredients, like you said, is very, very simple. You're just basically using the vegetables, salt, and in some cases, water if it's a pickled
Exactly.
vegetable.
So if you look at, for example, my cabbage, sauerkraut, cabbage, salt, 2 ingredients. How many 2 ingredients products you have in the market? You can find other sauerkraut that have cabbage, salt, vinegar. Vinegar acts as also a killer of probiotics because it gives shelf life. They're both nutritious, but one of them, when you talk to about probiotics, is favored by the natural preservation techniques.
That is basically, we're talking about kombucha, sorry, we're talking about vegetables. In terms of kefir and kombucha that's available, can they also be pasteurized to maintain shelf life, or
Yes.
they are something that always have the probiotics live?
So some of them have probiotic strains in the market. They are the real deal. But eventually, when it comes to kombucha, you have different kinds of making kombucha commercially. Some of them are made from concentrate. So basically, you read concentrate. So like think of like if you go to a burger chain, they're serving you Coke with sparkling water. They put kombucha concentrate plus sparkling water. That indicates it's a concentrate. Some of them is written pasteurized, and then what they do, they add probiotics. So they pasteurize it, that they add a bit of probiotics for you and the ingredients to make sure, because as a kombucha drinker, your first thing is not the flavor, is to make sure it has a gut health probiotics. So there are different ways for them to put the probiotics inside, but some of them are good, some of them are just pasteurized.
What's the biggest misconception you've come across when we speak about fermentation? Is there something that people often get wrong? Do they think it's like, oh my God, it's such a cumbersome process? Or it's like, oh, I can make it at home, or, it's easily available. Why should I take the effort?
Yeah, so that's a good one. The number one comes into safety. Most, like I've trained already more than 1,500 people for the past like 2 years, engaging in workshops, and one of the first thing they come is understand how to make it safely, because they don't know how the bacteria will change. They trust the process. So food safety, are alive bacteria food safe for you? So for me, the first thing is how to make sure to teach them how to make it safely and what are the parameters they can control, which we mentioned now. And second thing is about time. If you buy fermented products like the original stuff that we said, you're paying for time. So they assume that sometimes it doesn't take 2 weeks, it takes 2-3 days. But once they understand it takes weeks to develop flavor, they gain a better appreciation for the stuff they make. For example, with Christmas coming up in 2 weeks, you can now start preparing your ferment to be ready in 2 weeks. That's a lot of
Yeah.
thinking. So it's food safety and time.
If you're saying that in 14 days you'll have your own sauerkraut ready, why not make it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can have it in 7 days, but
Yeah.
it all depends on the flavor profile that you want. Everything can be made in short duration of time, depending on how you control the parameters. But yeah, but sometimes, it's, as you know, we live in a very busy lifestyle. Sometimes we're stuck between our jobs, it's 9 to 5, they're coming back home, and to ferment is not always the first thing, unless it's something we really want. But I encourage everybody, if you have many jars at home or one jar, try to do it, and you'll be rewarded to see that you've created something that took you time to make.
And then it helped you with your health in general.
Yeah, so of course, like I don't like to comment about how my customers use those products to help them, but one was the most empowering thing that made me jump from the corporate world to really full time in Tabchili, because I was doing it as a side hustle to grow it, was always the feedback I used to get from my customers, Gayu, about how it helped them in their issues and that, and how I have my recurrent customers buying me for favor, but also for the gut health aspect. And that was very empowering. It means that I'm on the right path.
A lot of people think, how do I incorporate? Like, imagine I'm going to eat a sauerkraut, want to start doing that for my health. Is there a way that people can make it more exciting? Or, generally people think it can only be on a side.
Yeah.
Have you thought of ways where people can actually include these things in a variety of ways to keep it more exciting?
So definitely this is one of the questions, because, okay, what is sauerkraut? People assume they know what it is, but it can be used in different kind of ways. So if I take, for example, I never consume fermented foods for the health benefits. I like sour. So you can add sour to your dish. For example, sauerkraut can be added easily on a taco, on a burger, on the sides. A red kraut can be on the side of your steak. It can be enhancing a flavor because it's not over too sour, but gives that nice kick. Kimchi can be added onto your bowls. I love making kimchi pancakes. Okay, it's very easy to make. There's so many different ways of doing it. Kefir, for example, my kids, as we were mentioning before, they don't They assume because my kids are like probiotics powerhouses, but they don't like this stuff yet because they're young. But what do? I do, for example, a smoothie in the morning, but I use milk kefir, bananas, strawberries, and make it interesting for them just to incorporate milk kefir in their diet without having them to drink something sour. There's many different ways of incorporating it. It's very easy to add a bit of sourness. Just think of, I want to add sour to my flavor, what you can do, and you have a plethora of foods you can add.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just trying to understand, generally because people think it's, oh, I can only eat it on the side, and then it's like 1 week and you get bored of it.
So, for example, like Eastern Europeans and Germans, sauerkraut is a staple house. I went to over a friend of mine, they're Russian, and they had a sauerkraut stew, mashed potatoes with sauerkraut, which was really nice. There are different ways that you can consume those because it's comfort food.
Yeah.
It's not complicated food. It's very easy to be added to different kind of textures and create that nice sour flavors that you might enjoy with food.
When we look for buying any fermented foods, how can we tell if a product is authentic and high quality?
So,
You said the number of ingredients you said first.
so the ingredients. So if it's fermented, it should be written on it fermented. Okay, so we write fermented. Okay, and then eventually the ingredients. There is nothing as a preservatives for shelf life. That means that it's been fermented the right way, and most fermented products are sold refrigerated. Why? Because they don't have any artificial flavoring, preservatives, or been pasteurized. So it means they are kept in their environment where the bacteria are still thriving. That's how you know. So refrigerated, and written on it, of course, raw, alive, unpasteurized, those kind of.
And ingredients that you can understand. If
Exactly,
anything
yeah.
that sounds
Yeah.
alien, then keep away from it.
Yeah, like I've been reading many labels and I can't pronounce them. I mean, like I read them once, but you tell me read it again, I have to read it to pronounce it because that's unfortunately we live in a commercialized industry. As you know, we push for volumes, we push for consumption, and that comes with pasteurized or processed food.
If someone wants to start incorporating fermentation into their life, now what's one piece of advice you will give them?
Start now.
Okay.
Because it takes time to make it. No, but start now. And what's nice about fermentation is really trial. You learn from the mistakes you will make. You will make mistakes, but those mistakes will shape your perception of flavoring, and you will be very proud to share with your friends and your family members something you have made with time. And that's very powerful because even my sauerkraut or your sauerkraut Gayu, anybody else is going to be different because even the bacteria around it will be different. So you cannot always guarantee the same flavor profile. That's what's interesting about it. So start now, grab a jar, get some salt, get that cabbage head, shred it, pack it, wait for it for next Monday. Hit us up, me or you, and let us know what flavors you have.
Amazing. It brings me to this question that you run workshops,
Correct.
right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What do people do in the workshop? How does it go?
So I have a very bad business model because I share all my recipes in my workshops, but that's what I want to do because I want you to give the confidence to leave home with great recipes. So for me, it's about driving a holistic approach to fermentation from different aspects. We run vegetable fermentation workshops where I teach you how to make kimchi, sauerkraut, and hot sauce, but I'm teaching you how to make 3 techniques of fermented vegetables, and you take everything at home with you, all the knowledge, the recipes, the jars, and everything else. We have one workshop on how to make fermented drinks, how to make your kombucha, your vinegars, and your water kefir to give you the confidence to make probiotic-rich soda substitutes. We have one on how to make your basic cheeses, your kefir, and also your sourdough starter to start in fermenting grains. And I have one advanced on how to make your miso and soy sauce. So in a way, I'm giving a spectrum for people to learn different kinds of fermented foods, from drinks to cheeses to grains to vegetables. So in case whoever wants to ferment something at home has knowledge and capacity. And what I want to give is for everybody who steps in, they leave with the knowledge and all the tools and recipes, and they don't see me anymore. So you see me one time and that's it. Only on Instagram, you send me pictures of this stuff.
Amazing. What are the range of products that Tabchili now produces and is available for people to buy?
We started first with our hot sauce, which is fermented for 3 months, and now we have a range of different sauerkrauts and different kimchis. But we also sell the starters. So all the starters from milk kefir starters, Gobi starters, everything you need to start your own journey. So not only the products, but also the starters. And coming up a couple of weeks, we'll also be adding our fermented pickle range. So more vegetables for people who don't have time to ferment, they can have access to them.
And where can people buy them? I know you've got a store,
Yeah.
but apart from that, where can people buy it?
So we're available across Spinneys and Waitrose. So you can just pass by any of the shops over there, or even online. We do same day delivery. And if you come to the store and want to talk about bacteria, I'm always there. So
Where else can listeners connect with you and learn more about your work with fermentation?
on Instagram, just hit us up on Instagram. I'm more than happy to jump on a call and discuss any queries. So people who are in my community, they know how accessible I am. I always make my stuff accessible to any questions regarding that, and even pass by the shop. We have kombucha we don't sell, it's for free. bring a small bottle, or we have bottles for you. We fill it up for you. We have some kombucha, and we can talk for like half an hour, 1 hour about whatever you need.
Amazing. I think I learned a lot about fermentation today. I'm anyways coming with a bottle to your store soon. Before we wrap up, we've got the last segment of the podcast, which is called the 1%. This is a little twist on a funny thing because, 99% of the conversations or content that I create for this podcast is all about women and women wellness. But we all know that men are a part of our lives too. Yeah, the 1%. Now, what is your 1% advice to the men in the lives of the women? What can men do better to help, women through their whole journey of life?
That's a good one. My wife would be proud when I answer it. I think the 1% that any man can give to support women environment, I think, is bringing wellness. Wellness can be from physical activity, from mental space, from even the food. And I think creating a community which is a tight knit household committed to the wellness of everybody involved. And as you know, we talk about wellness, can be meditation, can be physical activity, can be benefit eating. It creates that comfort space for everybody to thrive. That I think should be a priority. Everybody's working, everybody's stressed, but not everybody steps back and looks, how can I take this tight bud to the next level, which means coming in together and focus on wellness.
Amazing. So your 1% advice to the men is bring in wellness into your.
Yeah, not
Yep.
food,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
all the spectrum, which I think is very important for the household to thrive.
Amazing. Maher, I cannot thank you enough for the amazing information that you've given us and actually opened up our eyes to see how easy fermentation can be.
I hope I didn't complicate it a bit in the beginning, but it can be very easy to start. But Gayu, thank you so much. As I know, for me, spreading the knowledge and love for fermented foods and the health impact it can have is exactly what I want to do. So being with you here today, talking to your audience, is a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. That was it for now. I hope you've got all the, amazing tips and techniques to start your fermentation process. Do let me and Maher know how your journey into fermentation started and how it's going. We are very, very excited to know the process. Until next time, menopause, white pause, let's play.